Hi there, I'm Christine Zips, and today I have the distinct pleasure and honor to have as our very special guest, Associate Professor Olle Johansson. And we welcome Olle with just a brief introduction. He just asked me to just share his name, but I think it's very pertinent for purposes of sharing. We'll have his full bio posted in the comment section below. But Olle is a world-leading authority in the field of EMF radiation and health effects. Among many achievements, he coined the term screen dermatitis, which was developed into the functional impairment electro hypersensitivity, or EHS, which the recognition of this was mainly due to his work. And in one of his 2015 papers on this topic, he talks about the Swedish approach to EHS, viewing it as functional impairment, focusing on environment as the culprit. So, Olle, I officially welcome you to our presentation today. Thank you so much for being with us.
Well, it's a great honor to be with you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, truly. Well, I'd like to get started with, recently I did a series with Dr. Neil Bowman. He's a hearing loss specialist, and we talked about several topics related to hearing loss, of course, but Meniere's, and we touched upon tinnitus. And we'd like to follow up on that because he's not a specialist as Olle is on this topic, but very interested in knowing more. But I wanted to follow up on that, that Dr. Bowman says, in his opinion, he states that the majority of the cases, 80 to 95% of people experiencing tinnitus also have hearing loss, with exposure to loud noises coming in as a major contributing factor to tinnitus. And I understand that while it's been suggested that there's a potential direct connection between EMF exposure and tinnitus, and despite numerous attempts to study this, to date, from my research, there's been no causal association established among the scientific community. And is this your understanding, Olle?
Yes, it is. And this actually goes back quite a number of years, because when we started to study electrohypersensitivity, or as what you said, screen dermatitis from the very beginning, and now we are back in the early 1980s. Actually, the very first cases were reported in the United States and in Norway in 1979, but soon followed by other countries like Sweden, for instance. And very quickly we realized that quite a few of the persons we met with problems like skin irritation, skin rashes, and so on, they also reported about hearing dysfunction, hearing losses, tinnitus, and whatnot. And it took us quite a number of years before we could do a sampling of symptoms. We allowed electrohypersensitive people to write down any symptom, and then we compared it to the general Swedish population. And to make a very long story short, it turned out that a few symptoms, they were less common actually in electrohypersensitivity. Most symptoms didn't differ really from the general population, but there were a number of symptoms like, as I said, irritation, skin rashes, picking pain, redness, feeling of warmth from the skin, but also problems from heart palpitations, muscular and joint pains. And the only symptom every one of these electrohypersensitive persons had was actually tinnitus. And then immediately we tried to launch a research project to go into more depth. But unfortunately, I have to say that it has been very, very difficult to get the necessary funding. And some of these projects, they are not cheap, but they are not expensive either. I mean, you need the funding for personnel, for laboratories, for ethical permits, for running costs, publications costs, and all of that. And it's a little bit like when you go to your food store. If you don't have the money in your purse, you just cannot buy bread and milk.
Thank you for sharing that. And I can't help but be as I'm sure you are, annoyed, maybe for lack of a better technical term, that it costs so much money to prove harm
Yeah,
when
and
they can roll out this technology without safety testing.
yeah, and of course, the gain and profit from the rollout, that's just astronomically huge compared to the cost that would be needed to do some kind of pre-marketing testing, or at least some types of research along the lines as we just indicated. And especially for me, living in Sweden, where we have a high level of taxation, there is actually quite a lot of money, and it should be easy to support these kind of rather cookbook type experiments and studies. But I say again, it has been a very, very difficult task to get the money that we have needed. And for most projects, we never got anything. And you should maybe also inform your viewers and listeners that I'm retired, but I work actually more than ever. And so I try to keep up with all the projects and all the research coming along. And you also touched upon children, and children is especially important for me, as are animals, plants, bacteria, fungi, and so on, because all of them, and I would say that also includes children, are really innocent bystanders. And they are exposed, and we never ask them whether they wanted it or not.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up. And that's been my focus as well for our children. It's just so backwards and not the way that it should be. And thank you for your tireless work. I do know how busy you are for so long. And if, like me, I'm not taking in any sponsors or funding, and but that's kind of by choice. And I'm not in a level as you, but I care, and I want to get the information out there for people to make up their own mind. Hopefully we pique curiosity so they get out on their own. But
Well, if I
I,
could, yeah, if I
yes,
could tie on to that, I think you bring up some very important grounding pieces here. When I give lectures, for instance, I often start with showing a man who is holding his head against his hands against his head, and then the single word headache. And then I talk about some studies that have shown that, for instance, exposure from mobile phone radiation will cause headaches. And then I ask the audience, is that actually what you want for yourself, for your family, your children, maybe even for your pet dog and pet cat, that they all get headaches? And so far, through all these years, no one have stood up and said, yes, that's exactly what I want for my family. Not even people from the telecom industry, the manufacturers or the operators. No one wants to have that. So in a sense, we could actually stop there. We don't need to go deeper into things like tinnitus or cancer or neurological issues or DNA damage or bacterial interference. It's enough with the headache. And also I generally start my lectures with the second picture, where scientists have shown that both newly born babies as well as fetuses, when you expose them to mobile phone radiation, they get a more shallow heartbeat, but faster. In layman terms, their babies and the new fetuses, they get a stressed heart. And again, when I ask parents, is this what you want to give to your babies? No one stands up and says, oh yeah, that's exactly what I want to give to my child. They are shocked. They get angry, actually, not
they
with
should.
me, but yeah, they get angry with their health authorities, with their parliaments and governments who hasn't informed them. And as you said, people should be allowed to make an informed choice. What do I actually want to risk for my
Exactly.
family and my relatives?
Exactly. Thank you for bringing that up. And like I've said, it doesn't help our cause that this environmental man-made pollutant is invisible. You can't see, smell, taste, or hear it. and like Wi-Fi in schools and around schools, this is being done without parental consent. Like, as I'm sure you're familiar with Dr. Erica Mallory Blythe, she's come up with pointing this out in many of her presentations, and she even has a form. She said, okay, parents, you need to sign this, that you are saying it's okay for my child to be irradiated while they're in the classroom from the commercial grade Wi-Fi router in the ceiling and all of the other devices, not to mention maybe the cell antennas, our towers on the campus, maybe even mounted above the driver's head inside a metal school bus. And that's been promoted. We have a senator here, Cory Gardner in Colorado, as he's joined with Governor of New Mexico, Tom Udall, putting together a bipartisan bill to get these routers installed in all buses. And it started in rural areas. They call it rolling study halls, and saying it's the greatest thing because children who live in rural communities, they have such a long commute between home and school and back that by the time they get home, they're so tired to do their homework. And so this gives them a chance to get it done from their wireless laptop on their lap, along with the 55 other children inside the school bus with the signal pinging as it goes rolling along. And it's just horrendous. But Cory Gardner has said that I hope this catches on. It's going to be great. And I also recently heard another bill has been introduced to put this, make them smart buses so they have direct access to police, municipalities in the event of terrorism. Never mind that there have been no such instances in the United States so far of terrorism coming into school buses. And this is one of my hot buttons. I have a lot of opinions about that. But again, we have this wireless technology, this pulse microwave radiation emitting from these devices, and it's just so not right. But
yeah, and we all know that your president, he is very afraid of at least a few companies in China, like Huawei, who produces cell phone technologies, and he wants to keep this out of the United States. And that could be wise in a sense, but what he should also start to think about is the fact that in China and other Southeast Asian countries, in schools nowadays, less and less is actually allowed. The pupils are not allowed to use their cell phones or their tablets, laptops and stuff like this, and the exposure is brought down to a minimum. And China has a very simple business idea, namely, I would say they want to buy it all, including Sweden as well, and I don't mind. I like people from China. But by doing it, they need to have, instead of smartphones, they need very smart students and pupils, and therefore they avoid to expose them. And I see it more and more that they actually remove these gadgets from the teaching situation. And that would also go for similar bans in other countries, and countries which well, at least I have some kind of a prejudice around. I was surprised when I learned that you have bans in schools in countries such as Nigeria, Uganda, the Solomon Islands, Indonesia, and so forth. And I thought, like Sweden, we should be number one in this. And believe me, there are no such bans in Sweden, and I know there are no such bans in United States either. And maybe that will prove to be a mistake. And Erica Mallory Blythe, which I know very well and admire a lot, she has really taken up this old question, which I have been preaching for decades. And I said that you should only introduce my name because, after all, very, very few people know who I am. And that's good, because when I travel around here in Stockholm, for instance, I could be anonymous. And just recently, I sat in one of these commuter trains we have, and next to a woman, and she had a smartphone. I leaned forward to her and said, "Hey, do you know that the radiation from this smartphone is cancer classified by the World Health Organization in Geneva? And she looked in dismay at me and said, you are nuts. What are you talking about?
Yep.
This is just foolish rubbish. And I said, no, no, no. You have a smartphone. Google it. Write WHO, cancer, brain tumor. And she did actually. And it took a few minutes. And then she slowly turned to me and looked very, very puzzled and said, you were right.
Good for
So
you.
when you
Good for
inform
you.
people about this, you know, and especially parents putting their kids in school buses, school halls, school environments, lecture rooms, and expose them to a class 2B carcinogen, I mean, believe me, they don't want that. And they get again angry, not with me, but with their authorities who hasn't informed them about all these details and given them a full picture what they should really make a choice about.
Absolutely. And good for you for speaking up. I've seen I've seen instances like in a store we were checking out, and a young mother handed her unruly little, he was bored sitting in the grocery cart. She handed him her phone so he would be settled, and her keys, so he would be content. And oh my gosh. And I was upset with myself for not going over and saying anything. And but I was on the fence. It was really crowded, really busy. But I didn't feel prepared to say something. But I understand places like Environmental Health Trust, they have a supply of postcards that you can print out where you can hand people that sort of thing. And I thought, I think I'd be more comfortable with that, just my own style. But
Yeah,
I mean, I was in a doctor's office, and so rarely, but there was a young woman, two of them sitting side by side, not talking with one another, but doing this. And so I saw where she was, and I moved away from her a couple of seats, and she looked at me kind of puzzled, like, do I smell bad? And I said, no, I said, it's just that you're on your cell phone. And I said, and that's emitting radiation, and I'm very sensitive to it, which I am. But so I just, didn't want to get it secondhand, but that's okay. Thank you anyway. And I thought, well, maybe that'll make her think about it. But that's as
yeah.
close as I got with that. But,
Well, but you know, I allow myself actually to go up to people and talk to them, and especially, as you say, if you have parents with small children, that they give cell phones and tablets and other pacifiers, and then I at least take the chance to inform them as much as I can. And of course, some parents don't like that. But most are very thankful, and I see that I put a seed in their mental soil. And when I also talk about what we call power frequent magnetic fields from cell phones, which are extremely strong, and you can compare them here in Sweden to actually giving your small child in a baby pram, you give them several of the Swedish electric train engines. And when you tell people these kind of gross comparisons, first they don't believe you, they look bewildered, but slowly when you allow them to Google and surf for themselves, they realize that this odd man, he's actually right, you know.
absolutely, absolutely. And bless you for doing that. Thank you so much on behalf of all of us. And I got started with this from my grandchildren, and, not wanting them to awaken one day and connect the dots and wonder why their parents and grandparents allowed this to happen, once that they understand it and everything. So that's what compels me to do that for the children.